Hello, welcome back to part 2 of this special look-back edition of Talking Europe on France 24. Well, at the tail end of part 1, we were talking about Brexit and how people on the island of Ireland are coping with the imminent divorce of the UK from the EU. In Scotland as well, the First Minister is continuing to push back against Brexit. Nicola Sturgeon says that quitting the bloc would harm Scotland, and she is vowing to hold an independence referendum by 2021 if Brexit does indeed happen. Well, earlier this year, a UK government spokesman said, and I quote, Nicola Sturgeon needs to stop using Brexit as an excuse to push her unwanted independence agenda. Well, I put that to the First Minister when she came here to our studios in Paris. Here's her response.
I wish Brexit wasn't happening. I campaigned against it. I still would like to see Brexit reversed. So, I'm doing everything I can to try to avoid Brexit. So it's not an excuse.
It's an opportunity, perhaps, for independence.
I don't see Brexit as an opportunity in any sense, to be perfectly honest. But it does illustrate the case for Scotland being independent. Because we don't have the ability to decide for ourselves in Scotland whether we're members of the European Union or not, we find ourselves in this, anti-democratic position of having voted to stay in but being taken out, with all of the consequences that for generations to come that might have on our economy, our society, the opportunities for future generations. It really has, over the last couple and a half years, brought to the fore why it makes so much sense for Scotland to be able to take these decisions as an independent country rather than have those decisions taken for us at Westminster.
And we will, of course, follow all Brexit and Scottish independence updates here on France 24. Well, back on mainland Europe, another hot summer has brought back worries about an increasingly dangerous phenomenon, forest fires. Recently, our team went to Portugal, where dozens of people have died in wildfires in recent years. Luke Brown is still with us. Luke, it is no exaggeration, I think, to say that the forest fires in Portugal have really been a national trauma, particularly in 2017.
Yeah, Portugal is still scarred by the 2017 fires, both physically, when you drive around the country, many of the forests are still scorched. Swathes of them are still scorched indeed around the country. And mentally too, many people are asking themselves, will it happen again? And it has to be said, when you look at the situation of climate change, the answer to that question is probably yes. The fire season in Europe has got longer in recent years. It now extends from May until October. In 2018, Sweden, up in Scandinavia, had its worst wildfires in living memory. Already this year in 2019, Spain has had the worst wildfires in 20 years. Now, that anecdotal evidence really backed up by the data too, sent from the EU Copernicus satellite system, which monitors wildfires in Europe. In the first 6 months of 2019, we've had 1,400 wildfires. That's an 8-fold increase on the average of the previous 10 years. And in that same time, in the first 6 months, the area burned has increased 5-fold too. So clearly a very serious problem.
And in Portugal, there's been a new nationwide effort to try and reduce the risk of forest fires. We're going to show the viewers now part of your report.
Laying down the roots of a forest that could limit wildfires. A holiday activity with a difference for these Portuguese schoolchildren.
Quem gosta de plantar árvores? Então, só.
Isabel Pimenta is the town of Alvaiazere's forest manager. The goal is to encourage a change in mentality in the younger generation.
They have to tell their parents to plant native species close to their homes.
The municipality of Alvaiazere is 75% wooded. Isabel is fighting to increase the amount of native species being planted: oaks, chestnut, cork. This nearby grove was one of the first, planted with local oaks a decade ago. Isabel believes the forest need not only be a fuel for wildfires.
These are native species, more adapted to the region. And they're also resilient and more resistant. And they do protect these buffer belt zones much better from the passage of fire.
Forest managers like Isabel are on the front line of preventing Portugal's wildfires. The government now fines landowners who failed to maintain safe buffer zones around homes and roads. Alvaiazere was spared by the fires of 2017, but 2 neighbouring villages were badly damaged. Isabel is haunted that next time they won't be so lucky.
When the weather starts getting hot, my heart starts pounding with the fear of big fires.
com medo dos grandes incêndios.
So we saw some efforts there to stop fires breaking out in the first place. But Luke, if they do happen, and they will, as you've said, what's changed about how the European Union is responding?
2017 was very much the turning point for EU coordination and cooperation, with 200 people killed across the bloc. Portugal was worst hit as insufficient firefighting aircraft could be deployed from other member states quickly enough. Now, the EU has decided this year to launch its response, launching in July RESC-EU. Now, that's a fleet of aircraft, 7 planes and 6 helicopters for the moment. And the real big difference there is that they're going to be deployed by the EU itself rather than being voluntarily donated by member states. And the problem in the past has been that the EU emergency response mechanism has not been able to answer all assistance requests. 6 out of 17 last year couldn't be fulfilled for a want of resources being available. The RESC-EU annual budget of 136 million euros may sound a lot. The EU wants to expand that, and given the situation, the likely exacerbation of the situation in the coming years, they might want to expand that further. This year clearly will be its first major test.
And Luke, where can we expect to see you reporting in the next few months?
I believe we're heading to Japan in the autumn, and then after that we'll have to wait and see.
Indeed. Japan, of course, where there was that free trade agreement signed between Brussels and Tokyo earlier this year. Thanks so much, Luke. All right, well, we're going to stick with Portugal for a moment. So there's another growing danger there, as Luke mentioned, climate change. We met up with a beekeeper and honey producer called Clotilde Ferreira. She told us how she and her family are joining a Europe-wide effort to try and get some legal redress from the EU. They say the EU has failed to take decisive action on climate change.
We were affected by the fires. We used to have 300 beehives, but now we only have half that amount because so many were burned. There are no flowers, and the large-scale eucalyptus production works against us because it's all eucalyptus and no flowers. And then there's climate change. When it's hot, the flowers don't produce nectar, so the bees can't get the food they need to produce the honey.
And I understand that you and your family have signed a joint letter with many others around Europe accusing the EU of doing too little about climate change. What do you want from this legal case? Is it compensation?
We wrote our letter so that there would be a rethink concerning the planting of trees, so that less eucalyptus would be planted. We also want some help with our productions. We would like some financial help. Right now, we have no subsidies or aid.
Well, as you've probably noticed, concern about global warming has taken off across the continent. Young people have been at the heart of some of the most vocal and active demonstrations, with the Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg leading the way. France 24's Anaïs Guerra met Greta and other young activists in Brussels.
A high-profile reception for these high school students at the European Commission.
I'm an activist from Sweden. We are still striking because we have done our homework.
Greta Thunberg has mobilised young people around the world. In Belgium, thousands of school students have protested in the streets. Adelaide has been organising demos in the French-speaking half of the country. Their goal: demand that politicians make the climate a national priority.
We're scared. We want to know what to expect for the future. We want a change of system, so that we can keep our planet.
The young generation's determination is a cause for celebration for Delphine Misson, an environmental law professor.
You can really feel the energy from the street. The young people are calling for a change of mindset for society, which is dominated by producing and consuming. Young people are very conscious of the problem, and maybe they understand the problem better than adults.
The students' enthusiasm is contagious. Delphine and a dozen colleagues have proposed a climate law for Belgium to streamline national legislation.
It doesn't work well in Belgium. We aren't able to decide promptly together how to act faced with climate change.
The environment, though, is a victim of Belgium's political realities. It falls under the authority of 4 different ministries. For these experts, that fragmentation is an obstacle to finding a universal solution.
The trains are run by the federal state, but the other public transport, trams and buses, are regional issues. Every department has to take responsibility to make the necessary investments to achieve a shared objective.
The proposed changes to the constitution had the backing of the country's environmental parties, but they were rejected by Parliament. The mass demonstrations, though, have energised Belgium's Green Party. Their leaders coming to Paris to meet with 600 prominent European environmentalists to propose radical changes, such as the creation of a European climate bank.
There is a way to finance the energy transition in such a way that it doesn't weigh on families and other people, just like there was a way to finance the banking crisis.
Well, those fears for the future are already being borne out in one of the planet's most fragile regions, the Arctic. Polar ice is melting as the Earth warms, and that is presenting a new dilemma, whether to exploit the oil and gas under the Arctic Ocean. It's an endeavour that could prove lucrative, but which poses environmental risks. The French explorer Jean-Louis Etienne is a legendary polar adventurer who has become an advocate for the fight against global warming. When he came into our studio, I asked him if he thinks there will be new drilling in the Arctic.
What is difficult is nobody is allowed to say to the countries around the Arctic Ocean, the Russians, Canada, United States, and please leave this oil in the shore. They have the rights to exploit this gas.
And do you believe that these minerals will then be exploited to a great extent?
Yeah, I hope not, but yes, I think so, because the transition between the fossil fuel and other things, it will take times. And we will probably need this gas for the transition, yeah. But they have really to take care, because if there is a leak of oil, can you imagine a polar bears coming through the ice, black cover? Yeah, it will be catastrophic for the company.
And very hard to clean up as well, because it's so very remote.
Impossible to clean up.
Really?
It's possible, for example, in the warm, hot sea, Mexican Gulf, for example.
What's the difference then?
Because the bacteria, the bacteria, they eat when the temperature is close to 20, 25 degrees. But in this cold water, it will be not possible.
Well, a change of topic and a change of region now. Georgia lies on the old Silk Road in the Caucasus, a crossroads between Europe, Russia and the Middle East. The country's first female president has just completed 6 months in office. Salome Zurabishvili, an avowed pro-European. I asked her how close a relationship with the EU is she aiming for.
I think that things are changing very fast in the EU. We are still one of the rare countries that is Euro enthusiast. There are a few of them. And for that, I think that we're meaningful for the European Union. And I think that in these changes that the European Union is going through, there might be more spaces for Georgia than there was before, when everything was very set and very clear in the way European Union was going. So whether that will be and when membership, I mean, that's the way of defining the aspiration.
Because you're not currently on the list for accession.
That's right, but I think things are changing again. What does it mean? The most important is to get in the EU wherever we can get. Through bits and pieces, I would say we can get in the EU without being a full member in the political sense. And that's what we should aim at while waiting for the final decisions whenever they come in the form when they come.
Well, before we leave you, let's end with another fake news debunking. This one about the EU's most recognisable symbol, its flag. Here's Roxanne Runel.
Is the European flag a Christian symbol? The rumour originated with French far-left politician Jean-Luc Mélenchon. In June 2017, he said,
Frankly, why are we expected to put up with this? This is the French Republic, not the Virgin Mary. This thing is unconstitutional.
Later in October, Mr. Mélenchon's party asked for the EU flag to be taken down from the French National Assembly. Their reasoning, the man whose design inspired the European flag, Arsène Heitz, said towards the end of his life that he'd been inspired by the 12 stars on the so-called miraculous medal cherished by many Roman Catholics. Here's the real history. In 1950, the Council of Europe, not an EU institution, launched an open call to design a European flag. Arsène Heitz was a civil servant who submitted a few ideas. One of them looked a lot like today's European flag, except that it had 15 stars, representing the 15 members of the Council at the time. The committee set up to pick a winner liked this idea, but the 15 stars included Saarland, a formerly German territory that at the time had French protectorate status. To avoid diplomatic trouble, the Council reduced the number to 12, saying this was purely symbolic and would not change. At the end of 1955, the flag was formally adopted by all of the Council of Europe's members at the time. It's been the European Union's official flag since January 1st, 1986. Our conclusion, the European flag was not designed or intended as a religious symbol. It's the product of a colourful collective conception rather than an immaculate one.
And that wraps up this programme. Thanks for watching. Remember, you can find all of our past editions of Talking Europe on our website, france24.com. Hope to see you soon.